Best day of the week. It's Friday, and it's the best day of the week because it's Friday, but it's also the best day of the week because it's Mailbag Day. We take all your questions at Panther-Lair.com, answer as many of your questions as we can right here. We got some great questions this week. I'm actually really looking forward. I say it every week that I'm looking forward to answering the questions and kind of getting into these conversations, but it's really true today. Not that it's not true other days. Stop trying to question me and stop trying to box me into a corner on this. I always look forward to these mailbags. We always have great questions from the subscribers at Panther-Lair.com, and this week is no different. I think we've got some great questions this week. I'm excited to dive into them. So let's do it here on the Friday edition of the Morning Pit on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Yeah, we got questions about everything. There's a great question that we're going to get to right off the bat about sort of what-if moments in Pitt history or somewhat recent Pitt history. I'm really looking forward to that question. Some other stuff about kind of coaching positions, the offense. There's a lot. You guys came up with some great questions this week on Panther-Lair.com. I always enjoy these mailbags when we do them on the Morning Pit. And this week is no different. This week we've got some great questions. Of course, you know the deal. We take questions on the Between Fifth and Forbes message board at Panther-Lair.com. That's the website below, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. The most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet. Football, basketball, and recruiting. You can find it all at Panther-Lair.com, and message boards to interact with hundreds and thousands of other Pitt fans. Like literally all day, every day, Pitt fans are on the message boards at Panther-Lair.com talking about Pitt sports. It's the place to be. If you are a Pitt fan, you want to talk to other Pitt fans, you want to be part of the best online community of Pitt fans that you're going to find, this is the place to do it. Panther-Lair.com. And, of course, our YouTube channel right here, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. We put all of our Pitt video content, these daily morning Pitt videos, the weekly mailbag edition on Friday. We have our live show that we do every Wednesday night at 8 p.m. It's live. It's a live stream right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Jim Hammett and I get together for an hour to talk with you at 8 o'clock every Wednesday night. And when I say with you, I mean it. I mean, in the chat section, the comment section, you can post your comments and your questions. And we get into the interaction. We have a little back and forth and discussion and conversation to talk about what's going on in the world of Pitt sports. It's a lot of fun. I really enjoy it. I know Jim has fun. I think Jim has fun. I'll have to ask him next time. And we really like all the comments and questions you guys bring. It's a fun sort of back and forth. A little bit of a talk show there, or like almost like a call-in show. And certainly our post-game shows that we do are kind of along those lines as well. When there are games to talk about after, when there are actually games, we get together and talk about them on the message or on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. So do us a favor, like this video and subscribe to the YouTube channel. The subscribe button's right down there. I only need like 40 more subscribers to get to 4,000. And it's not that I'm going to stop asking for you to click the subscribe button. I just think it'll be really cool to get to 4,000. So do what you can. If you haven't hit the subscribe button, I mean, it's not going to cost you anything. We're not getting into your phone or anything like that. It's just do it. And then we can get those numbers up. We'd really appreciate it. So click that subscribe button, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. All right, a lot of great questions this week. Let's start, though. We had one question left over from last week. Uli's92 asks, there's been a huge what-if moment in the past 3 years at Pitt. In 2023, what if Pitt basketball beats Missouri? We could be in the Sweet 16. 2022, what if Pitt football beats Georgia Tech at home, who just fired their coach? Could have ended the ACC division era with the last 2 Coastal Division titles and 2 10-win seasons. 2021, what if Pitt football beats Western Michigan at home? Pitt could have been part of the 4-team college football playoff instead of Cincinnati. As a young Pitt fan, and I'm still reading the question here, as a young Pitt fan, I lack a frame of reference. What are the biggest what-if moments in Pitt's somewhat recent, like past 30 or 40 years history? How do these 3 compare? And out of those, which one do you think will stick out the most in Pitt history? A couple things there, all right? And let's start with, kind of the... Look, the reality is there's a pretty big group of Pitt fans who are yelling at their computer or their phone or however they're watching or listening to this right now, because you say you're a younger Pitt fan, so maybe some of this might be before your time, but the 2 biggest what ifs in Pitt history, I think, at least in the last 50 years. 45 years, and we have to go to 45 to include one of these, which may be the biggest what if in Pitt history. The 2 biggest to me It's 1981 when Pitt lost to Penn State in the regular season finale, 48-14. Pitt was number 1 in the country, well on their way toward winning another national championship. The second, after winning in 1976 and then winning again in 1981, to be like, before 1976, you had to go back to like 1938 for their last national championship. So you would have had 2 national titles in the span of like 7 seasons, a Heisman Trophy winner in there, a bunch of first-round draft picks. I mean, truly establishing yourself as one of the premier college football programs in the country. And they took a 14-0 lead in the first quarter against Penn State and then watched as Penn State rattled off like 48 unanswered points. Pitt ended up winning the Sugar Bowl that year and beat Georgia and had, they went 11-1. It was a great season. They were a top 5 team. But they could have been a national championship. And it could have been another national championship, another sort of modern era national championship to go along with 1976. And that's, to me, the biggest what-if in Pitt football history, Pitt sports history. Really. And then the second one, and I might put this as the second biggest what-if in Pitt sports history, at least in my mind, is the 2009 Elite Eight game against Villanova. I mean, that game was an opportunity to go to the Final Four. When we talk about accomplishments, and you mentioned 2022, and we'll get to that season more specifically in a second, but you talk about winning, back-to-back coastal divisions, and that'd be great. I mean, that would be a tremendous accomplishment and put them in position to maybe go back-to-back on ACC championships and 10 wins or 11 wins, and that would be good. But, like, when you're talking about the biggest what-if moments, you're talking about the great accomplishments, the truly like program defining accomplishments. And winning the national championship in 1981, making the Final Four in 2009 would have been program defining accomplishments. And who knows what happens with that Final Four team, or that Elite Eight team that lost to Villanova. If they beat Villanova, they go on to the Final Four to face North Carolina. I wasn't going to bet against Pitt that season. I mean, they were that good. They could have beaten North Carolina and, but potentially gone on and beaten Michigan State for a national championship. But making a Final Four is a program-defining accomplishment. It really is. And to miss out on that, and the way they missed out with the caliber of team that they had, is a huge what-if. It far surpasses anything that happened in the last 3 seasons. Now, I mean, to your point about this year, the basketball team, yeah. If they could have beat Missouri, if they could have got one of those wins against Clemson, they probably make the NCAA tournament, and maybe they make a run. Maybe they get to the Sweet 16. And that's a pretty big what-if moment. Disappointing. Not quite on the level of some of these other things we're talking about. Not really, I would say, even on the level of the 2009 Cincinnati football game. A game that if they had won, they would have gone to a BCS Bowl. It would have been the Sugar Bowl or something like that and gotten killed by Florida instead of Cincinnati going to the Sugar Bowl and getting killed by Florida. That's a bigger what if than this past season's basketball team. I mean, making the tournament would have been good. It would have been a successful season and quite an accomplishment to go to the tournament back-to-back years and potentially, I agree, maybe make a run to the Sweet 16. Maybe put themselves in position to really kind of make some noise. But it doesn't really compare to 1981's Penn State game, and it doesn't compare to the 2009 Elite Eight game. Those two, I think, are the biggest for me. Some of the other ones you mentioned, though, you talk about 2022 and that loss to Georgia Tech, that football game. And, yeah, that's a big what-if moment. But winning that game would not have guaranteed them a spot in the ACC championship game or a division title because they still would have had to play North Carolina. And they still had, 2 more losses after that Georgia Tech game. They lost to Georgia Tech, they lost to Louisville, and they lost to North Carolina. Even if they beat Georgia Tech, they still finished 6-2 in conference play, and North Carolina was also 6-2. So North Carolina would have won the tiebreaker and still won the Coastal Division. So just beating Georgia Tech wouldn't have gotten Pitt the division title and a spot in the ACC championship game. It was really in tandem, the tandem losses of Georgia Tech and Louisville, that if you take care of business in those games, which were both winnable games, which were both disappointing losses, both losses where the offense shot themselves in the foot repeatedly and cost the team the win. The defense played well enough to win in both of those games, and the offense just blew it time and time again. If they take care of business in those 2 games, they finish 7-1, even with a loss to North Carolina. They finished 7-1 in ACC play, and they go back to the ACC championship game and face Clemson. And who knows what happens there? I mean, Clemson was a top 15 team, but maybe they pull off a win and they win the ACC back-to-back, or at least they win the Coastal back-to-back. So just the Georgia Tech game alone wouldn't have been enough to get them there. They would have had to win both of those games. And then in 2021, just because you brought this one up, said if they beat Western Michigan at home, they could have been in the playoff. I'm not so sure they would have made the playoff. Yeah, I was kind of like looking like, if they had taken care of business against Western Michigan, they would have gotten to like 7-0 before they lost to Miami. And at 7-0, they probably, like, kind of looking at what the polls looked like at that point, 7-0, Power 5 teams, you're no worse than like 17. You're probably top 15. Disrespect for the ACC, disrespect for Pitt, maybe doesn't get you into the top 10, but it's got you in the top 15. When you lose to Miami, you fall. You know what I mean? When they lost to Miami, I think it cost them like 8 spots or so. They dropped out of the polls, and they were like at 17 or 18 when they lost to Miami and fell out of the polls. So, I mean, you're probably, even if you're top 15, you're dropping down into the 20s. Now, obviously, they worked their way back up. They climbed back up. But if you look at kind of how far they climbed back up after the loss to Miami, when they were able to rattle off wins the rest of the season, whatever it was, like 4 wins in a row, 5 wins in a row, including the ACC championship game, like you look at what kind of ground they were able to make up. If you apply that to kind of, if you say, if they beat Western Michigan, they don't fall out of the polls when they lose to Miami, right? They drop into the 20s. Well, then they climb back up, 12 spots, 15 spots, 13 spots or something like that after winning out the rest of the way and winning the ACC. That still only gets them to like 7 or 8. And I think the reality is, even at 12-1, I'm not sure they crack into the top 4 and unseat Cincinnati. Notre Dame was 11-1 and didn't climb into the top 4 and unseat Cincinnati for that spot. I think that year there was a groundswell of support for having, if there's an undefeated AAC or an undefeated Group of 5 champion, they should be in the playoffs. I think it had been coming to a head, and Cincinnati was a really good team that year, and they went undefeated. And so I think Cincinnati was, Pitt would have had to be undefeated. It wasn't just Western Michigan. It would have had to have been Western Michigan and Miami. You would have had to win both of those. And then, if you win the ACC championship and you're 13-0, then you're going to bump Miami out of there. You're going to take one of those spots in the top 4. But I don't think one-loss Pitt gets Cincinnati out of that number 4 spot to make the playoffs. So even then, I don't really know if it would have made enough of a difference. I think you had to win both of those games and, to get yourself to give yourself a chance to pull that off. So, but thanks for the question. I mean, Pitt fans don't like going down that particular memory lane of what if games, but look, ask any Pitt fan who's like 50 or older, the 2 biggest what if moments, it's the 1981 Penn State game and it's the 2009 Elite Eight. All right, questions from this week. Let's move ahead here. Chad Papp starts us off, says, an online gambling site has Pitt's 2024 win total at 5.5. What say you? Over or under 5.5 wins for the 2024 Panthers? I always get it wrong. Always get it wrong. I chronically predict wrong on Pitt's win totals. I can't remember the last time I got even close to being right. And usually I predict wrong on the positive side. I think my prediction usually ends up being 1 or 2 more wins than they actually get. This year, I don't think that's going to be the case because I have my questions. I have my questions, and to some extent I have my doubts. There are so many question marks for this team to answer. And you know what? I had those question marks last year too, but I thought the overall talent and progress and development of the program would still carry them to like 7 or 8 wins. I think I probably predicted 8-4 last year. But I had big questions. One thing that I kept saying all last offseason, heading into the season, I said it a lot in August. I said, look, my biggest problem with this team is that you're counting on a whole lot of guys to do things they've never done before. Like, not anything crazy, but like you're counting on so many guys who had never performed at a certain level consistently over the course of a season, and you were counting on them all to do it. And individually, you could go player by player and say, okay, yeah, I could buy that Bub Means will do this. I could buy that Deion Hayes will do this. I could buy that Javon McIntyre will do this. I could buy that, Bengali Kamara will do this. I could buy all of these things individually. But it's very difficult to believe that all of them will happen. That all of them will happen in the same year. That's where it becomes a tougher sell, when you need all of those things to happen in order for the team to be successful. And we saw, like, a lot of those things did not come to fruition. A lot of the things they needed to happen, things that had never happened before. Phil Dracovic playing a full season, although he didn't, he wasn't limited to a partial season for the reason we thought he was going to be. It was something a little bit different, but we thought it was going to be injury. Turned out just to be bad football. But all those things that they needed to happen, some of them happened. Bub Means eventually became that guy. Javon McIntyre obviously played well. The safeties played, there were some things that came to fruition, but not all of them. And not enough of them to carry the team to success. And so I had real questions last year, but I still thought they'd be able to pull off like 8 wins, maybe 7, worst case scenario. Obviously, there was a much worse case scenario that was out there, and I didn't really consider as a possibility. This year, I got a lot of questions. I'll just be completely honest. I have a lot of questions, and I don't think I'm alone in that. And I think if I listed off the questions I have about this team, I don't think many people would really disagree. But take your pick of positions. I've probably got a question about it. Feel pretty good about the running backs. I think those guys are solid. I know the tight ends are okay, but I just don't know if they're going to be used or not. I like the safeties. I think the safeties will be really good. I think the linebackers are pretty quality. I'm coming around on Nate Yarnell, on believing that he can guide the offense, that he can operate the offense. But pick a spot, like spin the wheel of, positions as a offensive line. Where's the depth on this offensive line? You can convince me the starting 5 is solid, but when's the last time Pitt only needed 5 offensive linemen in a season? And I don't see, there's no experienced depth on this line. And if they run into a key injury or two, which is often the case, that, if you run into a key injury or two, you're going to be in trouble. But that's the case for this team. Defensive line. They weren't even that productive last season, and I know Randy Bates and Pat Narduzzi have said, well, they didn't get as many sacks because teams were running the ball a lot. Yeah, that's fine, but they didn't exactly get all that much pressure or sacks when teams tried to pass. So that didn't really work out, and now they've lost 5 guys from that defensive line, right? All the defensive tackles, and say what you want about them, Danielson, Bentley, and Green in particular, but they had played a lot. They weren't very productive, but they played a lot. You lose your most promising young defensive end in Sam Okunlola. You lose DeAndre Jules, who could have been a veteran leader for the tackles. And I like some of the young players they have in this group. I like some of the transfers they brought in. I've liked Deion Hayes for 9 years, it feels like. But here again, you're relying on a lot of guys to do things they haven't done before. Not that they're not capable of those things, but things they've never done before. The corners, I kind of think those guys will be pretty good. I think they'll be solid. I think they've recruited those positions well, but they're all new. And you'll have years where you have a lot of new players in key positions. It's the nature of college sports, right? There's constant turnover. But when I look at this team, there's a lot of turnover. There are a lot of unproven players. Wide receiver, new coordinator, new offensive staff, a bunch of guys coming from a different level of college football, which it doesn't guarantee that they can't succeed at this level, but it raises questions about whether they can succeed at this level. And I think I'm taking a pretty firm, I shouldn't say firm, but taking a pretty defined wait and see approach with this team, because I just don't know. I just don't know how it's going to come together. It's really tough to pick a win total when you don't even know what the offense is going to look like or if it's going to work. Some days when I hear Cade Bell and the offensive coaches and the offensive players talk, I get a little convinced about the possibilities. I get a little convinced about how it could work and how they might even make up for some of the talent deficiencies. And then other times I look at it and I'm like, vaya con Dios, bro. So betting 5.5, I would probably take the over on 5.5. I'm just not sure how far over I would go because I got a lot of questions. About this team. We might have one more. Let's see where we're at. Oh, we're right around that 20-minute mark. Let's take this question from A.S. Daniels. It says, can you speak to any major changes in football recruiting approach? According to Rivals, we now have close to 500 offers out. In the past, we might have 200 to 250 out at this time. Is it counting and reporting differences, or is there a bigger net cast? Will we get will we get better results? I don't think there's been a change in approach in terms of offers that have been put out. Here's the problem. All right. Here's the problem. And I this is an issue for me too. And there's no real good solution to this. So like when we look in the Rivals database, we look at the offers, right? Some of these guys tweeted out their offer from Pitt when they were freshmen in high school. And Charlie Partridge came through this kid's school and told a group of a dozen guys, hey, man, we want you guys to play at Pitt. Brennan Marion did it. Charlie Partridge did it. Charlie Partridge did it a lot. And for Charlie Partridge, for Brennan Marion, it's about, and for a lot of these coaches, it's about establishing those connections, establishing ties, beginning the relationships. For us, it clutters up the Rivals database because you never really know how many of those guys hold on as legitimate targets over the course of their careers. By the time they get to their junior year of high school, is Pitt still seriously interested in them? We could go through a significant number of the 500 offers that we list in the Rivals database and ask those guys, hey, do you still talk to Pitt? And they would say no. We just don't have the resources, the manpower to thin the herd, so to speak, on what that offer sheet looks like. So it's challenging. It's a good reference tool, but it's not without its shortcomings, that offer sheet, the offer list, the list of offered prospects. So I don't think there's been a change, but I will say this, with a change in coaching staffs, like we've seen where you change the entire offensive coaching staff, these guys are going to make their own offers. They're going to try and pick up on a few guys who were being recruited by the staff before, guys that they would like to also land, but they're also going to send out their own offers. They're also going to, blaze their own trails, so to speak, and try to get their own guys and guys that either they have relationships with or guys that they're trying to land that they feel like is a good are a good fit. And so you end up with like overlap. Like, no, I haven't talked to him since Coach Underwood left, or I haven't talked to them since Coach Marion was there. I haven't talked to them since this or since that. And so it's a little bit tricky in that regard. You know what I mean? It's a little bit tricky because yes, we list close to 500 guys with Pitt offers. No, they're not necessarily all legitimate offers. So I don't think there's been a major change. I think you've seen a few geographic areas get hit a little bit more when they were able to, when the coaches went on the road in January. We saw guys in Texas. We saw guys in California more. And so you saw a bunch of offers go out in those states, which are not typically Pitt priorities or Pitt recruiting areas. But you saw the offers go out there. But overall, I don't know if there's been a major change in philosophy. We'll see when they get the official visits in June and some of the guys they offer from their camps or any of the mega camps and things like that. If there's a certain type of player that they're going after at this position or that position, different body types or skill sets at defensive line or tight end or whatever it may be. But overall, I wouldn't say there's been too much of a change in the recruiting approach. Not that I've seen so far, at least, but who knows? Maybe by the end of the summer, we'll have a different take. All right, we'll stop there. If we have leftover questions, we will get to as many. We'll get to those next week for sure. We'll get to you guys because you have some good questions in this thread. So we'll address those in next week's mailbag. But in the meantime, thanks to everybody who contributed questions for the mailbag. Thanks to everybody who watched these videos today and all week long. Make sure you like and subscribe. That would make us feel great. We made it to the end of the week, folks. I hope you have a great Friday and a great weekend. We'll catch up with you on Monday for the Morning Pit right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.